Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Scottish Learning Festival 2019, and thank you very much for signing up for my workshop, which is very focused on inspection and improvement actions. I delivered a similar workshop here last year, and I'm really delighted to be back again today. Speaking from personal experience, I think it's fair to say it's not unusual to leave workshops feeling overwhelmed, a little bit deflated, or like the standards that are being set out just aren't obtainable for you or your situation. So I certainly hope that's not going to be the case for my workshop today, which will become clear as we go through it. My name's Emma Turnbull. I'm the head teacher of Bodham School, and a few people have been asking. It's in Peterhead, north of Aberdeen, so a fair journey away from here. As a matter of interest, I'm just going to ask everybody where you all are in terms of your inspection experience. I'm not going to call on anybody to actually say anything, so you are free to raise your hands without fear that I'm going to call on you. So has anyone been involved in inspection as a teacher previously? As a member of management? A few people. Has anyone been involved in a failed inspection or an inspection where you've required a revisit? Few people, don't worry, you're in good company. Is anybody here from a school that's due for inspection or awaiting an inspection? Okay, excellent. Anyone who's never been involved in an inspection before? Few people. And any inspectors here? Oh, excellent. Hello. Well, I've been in the same position as most of you, but not all. My first ever involvement in an inspection was in February 2017, and it was as the head teacher of a primary school, and I had only been in post there for 3 months. I knew there was a lot to do, and to be honest, I was gutted that the inspection had arrived so early because I knew things probably weren't going to go very well. I was invited here last year to deliver this workshop by Education Scotland, but I'm not talking or presenting on behalf of Education Scotland, so everything that I share with you is very much from the perspective of a real-life head teacher, and I really hope that you find it useful. Some parts are going to be more relevant to managers, some to teachers, but I think, or at least I hope it's useful to have an overview of the whole experience. So I'm going to share a combination of inspection experiences, improvement actions that we put into place to overtake our targets, and the impact of the inspection. So hopefully there's something for everybody and something for you to take away with you. So, as you can likely tell, I am a relatively new head teacher. I keep getting called the 12-year-old head teacher. I'll have been in post for 3 years this November, so I'm not somebody who has got years and years of experience, and I certainly don't have all the answers. But the reason that I was asked to speak here last year is because I managed to make a really positive change in my school within 40 school weeks between inspections. So to give you a bit of context, this is my school here. We have got 126 primary pupils at the moment across 6 classes, and we've got 14 children in our nursery, which also supports eligible twos and extended provision. Our children receiving free school meals is about 1/5 of our current roll, and 38% of our children are in deciles 1 and 2, and we have got no children above decile 5. Being an Aberdeenshire school, you won't be surprised that the school's also been subject to staffing difficulties, so there were times between inspections where I had to cover classes, I had to deliver Macron, and just last term, thankfully not in between inspections, I ended up teaching full-time. And it's a lovely school, but again, we're not immune to children with significant learning needs, significant behavioural needs, so it's been no means an easy task, but I'm hoping it's sounding like a bit more of an attainable goal to some people that are sitting here who might be in similar situations. So the school, prior to my arrival as head teacher, had a very stable staff team that had been there for many, many years, and the school was in need of modernisation in line with the principles of Curriculum for Excellence. In addition to this, I was actually a class teacher at the school before my appointment, so as some of you might be in that similar situation, that also comes with its own advantages and disadvantages as well. So the advantage was I'd already been involved in shaping a vision for the school, I had good relationships with the pupils, the staff and the community, but the challenges where I was now managing colleagues that I had taught alongside, as some of you are nodding along, so you've probably had the same experience, and just being respected and seen in the school community in a different role than you've had previously. And of course taking on a school that was red hot for inspection. So there were some foundation improvements that needed to be made that I moved on quickly, just creating cohesion amongst the staff team, involving the school community in reviewing the vision, values and aims, and making sure we had a really clear shared vision for moving forward, and also refreshing our curriculum to be more in line with our local context and Curriculum for Excellence, which I'll talk a bit more about later on. My overall priority for Bodham School was and still is the same priority no matter what your role is that you will have for your schools. It's to improve the standard of education and the overall educational experience that the children are receiving there. So how good is our school for is the main tool that I use to self-evaluate and design improvements, and was really invaluable to me as a brand new head teacher. Knowing and living this document should be a priority for you and your colleagues or your staff, and I particularly find the features of highly effective practice helpful as an evaluation tool and to judge standards. And I use the challenge questions for structuring professional dialogue, observation schedules, collegiate activities, tracking meetings, and lots of other areas. And the looking inwards, outwards and forwards model has been an integral part of the improvements that we've made. It's supported us to continually build on good practice from within our school, seek advice and look from good practice from elsewhere, and continually plan improvements as part of looking and moving forwards. The information and guidance in How Good is Our School For continues to be at the root of our self-evaluation. And if there's anybody, I know there are people in here just at the start of your teacher journey, this document is one you really need to get familiar with. I think one of the most stressful things that can happen in a school is being told that you're going to get inspected. And if your authority are working off of some sort of a list, recommend you don't follow it at all. I think my school was deemed to be around number 34 on that list when I got my notification that we were going to be inspected. So I was thinking I had about 33 lots of notifications before me, was definitely not the case. And having never been involved in an inspection before in any capacity, I had no idea what to expect, except that it would probably be stressful. Education Scotland are constantly reviewing their approaches to inspection, so although I'm sharing with you what my experience was and the processes that were in place with me, there is nothing to say this would be the same for anybody else, because I know that they are always adapting these. But I can only share what my experience was, some of which I imagine would still be similar. So the initial email that I got contained information about inspection, and it let me know that the managing inspector would be in touch. And I was then contacted and asked for information in advance, such as staffing templates, detailing staff members, their roles, practical things like the timings of the school day, your self-evaluation pro forma, which is obviously incredibly important, and information about which meetings needed to be organised throughout the week. You're assigned an inspection administrator from Education Scotland, and that is the person that you will get most of your emails from, including information about questionnaires that need to be completed by partner agencies, staff, parents, carers, and by your pupils as well. You also get assigned a managing inspector, and that is the inspector who is in charge of your inspection and the person you will have contact with before your inspection. If you are the person getting that phone call, have your diary ready. There is a lot of information and you're probably already feeling a little bit overwhelmed, so just get everything written down, and that way you can go back and have a read over it when you're feeling a bit calmer. My nerves were actually calmed slightly following the first contact I had with my managing inspector, who was Aileen Monaghan, who explained that Education Scotland were there to support the school and work in partnership with us, and that ultimately we shared the same goal, which is wanting the best for the children and the community of Bodham. So that initial phone call, although there was a lot of information, did actually make me feel slightly calmer than I had been. I would advise you that if you've got any concerns, any challenging members of staff, or particular situations that you are worried about that could affect your inspection, it's really important that you share those with the managing inspector. That's a question lots of people have asked me about. Should I say anything? Should I wait and see how it pans out? Definitely tell your inspector about it beforehand. No school is perfect, and it's unusual for a school not to have somebody that's perhaps not working the way that everybody else in the school is. It's not going to go against you, but if you don't share it with the inspection team, they might have questions about how well you do know your staff and their views and what's going on. I would definitely say that being open and honest is the best start you can give yourself and you can give your school. So like I said, please bear in mind that this was my inspection, and as I said, it will only be relevant to my school. It's dependent on your school, the size of your school, the team that are going to be visiting you, but I've included it because it's something people always ask me about. The inspection usually starts with a scoping paper meeting, and this is the self-evaluation document you'll have created or completed ahead of the inspection. It's incredibly important. Be as honest as possible. Don't try to cover anything up, exaggerate anything. The inspectors will know about it, and they will know very quickly. And if you haven't been honest, they'll have doubts about your ability to self-evaluate, which is the last thing that you want. So I would say be concise, honest, and provide evidence for the statements that you have given. I think it's really important that you practice how you're going to present your scoping paper. There's no need for anything fancy, it's a discussion, but practicing it gives you a bit more confidence because it is a high pressure situation. You will be questioned on parts of it. It's not to trip you up, it is to check that you are fully understanding what you've written and that your self-evaluation is accurate. And you do want to impress in that meeting. It's the very start of your inspection. I think it sets the tone for the rest of it, and it's also the first opportunity you've got to convey to the inspectors that you're confident and that you know your school and that they can have confidence in you going forward in the process. As soon as possible after this or during this, if you have a big team, the team will want to start observing learning and teaching and any meetings that have been arranged, such as with the parent council chair or parents who expressed that they wanted to meet from the questionnaires. If your inspection doesn't start with a scoping meeting, it's likely to start with a safeguarding meeting, which I'll talk about later. If you're part of the management team, or like me, if you are the management team yourself, you're going to have lots of meetings with the inspectors throughout the week around the core QIs and also the further QI that you've chosen yourself. If you're the only member of management, this is a really exhausting week. Each QI meeting's a discussion, but it does feel like a presentation and interview sort of rolled into one. The inspector will ask you questions, you'll have to present and discuss evidence, and there is no getting away from the fact that it does feel like a high pressure situation. Again, I would say be really honest. If there are developments that you haven't managed to get to yet, say you're aware that there needs to be work done, and this again gives them confidence in your ability to self-evaluate. On reflection, these discussions were excellent CPD. I can honestly say that now in some of the best CPD that I've ever had, but at the time it's quite hard to see that because it does feel like a lot of pressure. You should have evidence folders available to the inspection team to view. So for my first one, like I said, I'd only been in post for 3 months. So I just had one school improvement folder and had it split into each of the QIs. And I had school information with class lists, attainment folders, tracking folders, and improvement documents such as our school improvement plans, copies of the scoping paper, etc. available. But if I'd been in post longer, I would have split it up into evidence folders for each of the QIs, which is what I did for our return inspection. So, don't get too excited when you see this part of the timetable. Sharing of findings was Thursday afternoon for us. This was due to the inspection, luckily for us, falling on a week where we had a holiday on the Friday. So this is not the case. Normally inspections are 5 days if it's the longer model. This means there are a lot of classroom observations for staff, and everybody wants information about how often, how long. Of course, teaching staff, that's what they're worried about. It really, really varies. There's not really much point in giving you advice on that. Sometimes an inspector will go in, it's a point of the lesson they don't think is particularly helpful, so they might want to come back later. Sometimes they might come in at a point where they want to see where the lesson unfolds, how it unfolds, what the plenary is going to be. So I would say as a teacher, you should be prepared during the inspection to be observed at any time for any of your lessons. And your head teacher will submit your class timetables prior to the inspection, so the inspectors will be turning up at those times looking to see the subjects that have been listed on your timetable, because obviously they're trying to get a balance across the curriculum. One opportunity that I did particularly enjoy during the inspection was observing practice with the managing inspector. So we chose a confident member of staff, as obviously pretty daunting experience. And after we'd observed the lesson, the managing inspector then observed me giving feedback to my teacher. She then shared her feedback, and thankfully it was similar. It's an excellent CPD opportunity for a member of management, but also for the teacher, but I would choose somebody who's feeling particularly confident. It's a lot of pressure. Throughout the week, regardless of what role you're in, be prepared to be asked anything at all. I know it sounds scary, try not to worry about it as much as you can. The inspectors aren't trying to trip you up, they are trying to do their job, which is to evaluate the standards in your school, and in order to do this, they have got certain questions that they have to ask and things they will want to know about. The inspectors did let me know during the week that things weren't perhaps heading in the direction we wanted them to go, and I was absolutely gutted. I knew the staff had worked incredibly hard, and for all of that still not to feel like it was enough, it was really hard to hear and really hard to swallow. So the grades that we were awarded were our nursery got good for securing children's progress and ensuring well-being, equality and inclusion, and satisfactory for leadership of change and learning, teaching and assessment. And our primary, we got satisfactory for leadership of change and ensuring well-being, equality and inclusion, and weak for learning, teaching and assessment and raising attainment and achievement. Still pretty hard to look at these, even with everything that's gone on, hard to look at that. But despite the fact that the results were disappointing, particularly obviously the 2 weak areas, I did actually find the process itself to be very supportive. The team were really nice, they were caring, they were very sympathetic to my situation and the fact that I hadn't been the head teacher there for very long, but they did demonstrate the absolute commitment to reporting transparently and fairly, which at the end of the day, that is the job that they are there to do. So from this inspection, as I'm sure you can imagine, there were many, many areas for improvement and development highlighted in order for us to progress. So the main areas were improving the consistency of children's experiences, increasing the pace of learning, providing more challenging and relevant activities, making sure we had effective assessment arrangements in place, understanding of progression needed to be improved, accurate monitoring and tracking of progress, and moderating achievement. Our wellbeing programmes were picked up as needing considerable amount of work, and also being able to track and progress improvements in that area for our learners. And of course the one that's going to be on there always is improving attainment in literacy and numeracy. When you get your inspection feedback, if you're somebody that's at that final meeting, write down as much of it as you can, because not everything is then going to be put into your inspection report. So the feedback here is the short summary. The actual summary of inspection findings is much more detailed, and again was pretty hard to read straight after that inspection. And one of the things that I really worried about following the inspection, some of you might have been in a similar position, was the reaction of the school community. Particularly dreading the publication of our inspection letter, which you have to share with your parents and carers, and it is going out with those grades on it. I think you always imagine the worst. You know, I was picturing the headlines, head teacher ruins school in 3 months, and all of those things, but actually it wasn't anywhere near what I imagined. A couple of parents approached me about it. I was honest with them. I told them I had plans for improvement, and I was confident in the staff team that they would be able to undertake those improvements. And one parent wrote to the parent council about it, and the parent council chair and I together we wrote a reply. And that was honestly pretty much it. So if you're panicking about that, usually the reaction is not as much as you're going to emphasise it in your head or exaggerate it in your head. I also worried about having to go to committee in front of local councillors and talk about the inspection, especially I didn't actually know I had to do that until a few weeks beforehand. So I made sure that I was really prepared and that I presented to them what I planned to do to improve. I did obviously explain the grades, but I focused a lot of what I was saying on here is how I plan to overtake this and how to improve it. I presented it with confidence, far more confidence than I was actually feeling at the time, but it seemed to do the trick because they seemed enthused by it and they didn't ask me any particularly awkward or challenging questions, which was a big relief for me. So, like I say, knowing that I myself and that the staff team had done as much as possible in the time that we had, the results were hard to hear. We did have to take a little bit of time to lick our wounds, recover and regain our composure a little bit. So we focused on fixing small things we could easily without too much work until we started just to get ourselves together and recover. And eventually, when we started reflecting on the experience, we did start to see the benefits. So firstly, having inspectors agree with your priorities and goals and have belief in your abilities, I think is one of the biggest confidence boosts you can have as a head teacher or a member of a management team. The inspection team had also shared with the staff the confidence they had in them, and that gave the staff a big boost for their self-belief and their commitment to actually undertaking the improvements and towards reaching our goal. The feedback provided from the inspection very clearly set out what needed to be achieved in order for us to improve our standards and be deemed satisfactory. Myself and the staff team were left feeling determined to improve our school for our children and the community, but also to prove to the inspectors we could reach the standards that they'd set for us. Ultimately, our accountability lies with the children and families that we provide our service to. However, knowing that inspectors are coming back to reevaluate your standards and measure the progress of your improvements definitely adds a further dimension of accountability, and it's actually a really good additional driving force for driving improvements forward. Increased support and partnership working for me were two of the biggest impacts from the first inspection. Knowing that Education Scotland wanted us to do well, they were working in partnership with us to improve standards, and having contacts I could reach out to for advice was really invaluable in moving the school forward. And Aileen, on leaving the school after the first visit, said she wanted this inspection to be a springboard to improvements. and success for myself and for the school, and it did take me a little while to see it through the disappointment of having a weak inspection, but on reflection now, the first inspection definitely was a springboard to success for us. And as you know, the theme of this year's festival is empowerment, and this visit empowered me to ignore outside influences and priorities being pushed upon us and move forward focusing solely on the inspection feedback and the goals that had been set out for us, which I believe was a really key part of our success. So, after our brief recovery period, we designed action plans with tight timescales in order to make the necessary improvements. So we used How Good Is Our School For, the National Improvement Framework and the detailed inspection feedback to create our plans. We made an action plan for each of the quality indicators we were evaluated as being weak in, and this is an example of one of the pages. These documents were quite extensive, but that's at least an exemplar for you. We made this in the format of You Said We Did, so detailing what the inspectors told us to do, how we planned to improve and what our intended outcomes were. We colour-coded the actions, changing these to green as we completed them, which really supported the staff in remaining focused and empowered by the progress that was being made. We also included evaluations and impacts for each section to demonstrate that we'd measured the impact of our improvements and how effective these had been. In moving forward, strategic leadership, such as is described in How Good Is Our School For, was definitely required in order to ensure improvements were well informed and done very collegiately, but also undertaken at a fast pace. And I had to balance this with taking account of workload pressures and wanting to look after the well-being of my staff, so we designed big improvement actions that we felt would have a significant positive impact in a short space of time and would cover many of the areas for development that had been identified. We wanted to work smarter, not harder. Not easy to do when you're working in a school. So, by show of hands, this is now talking about some of the things that we did. Has anyone heard of curriculum bundles or bundling before? Yeah, lots of nodding. For those that don't know, curriculum bundling is separating experiences and outcomes into groups that need to be covered each year. We actually did start our bundling journey prior to inspection 1, but unfortunately we didn't have it up and running well by the time the inspection arrived. So we applied the looking inwards, outwards and forwards model to design our new look curriculum. We looked at what was good about our curriculum as it was. We then looked at examples of what was being done elsewhere, including bundles, and we decided where we were going. We decided bundling was the most appropriate way forward for us, so we looked at bundling examples from elsewhere, and rather than creating more work for ourselves and making our own, we chose the bundle that best fitted our school and then we adapted it. Much of the feedback we were given, as you will have seen, was around consistency, progression and use of assessment. So one of our first improvements was to establish learning, teaching and assessment cycles that would replace what had traditionally been terms. So these cycles consist of 5 or 6 weeks of a teaching block, which is taken from our curriculum bundle, followed by an application week and then a challenge week. The same group of experience and outcomes are taught as part of this cycle throughout the school, which allows for more natural progression and more natural moderation. This is then followed by the application week to assess how well children can apply the skills. With the introduction of holistic assessments, the aim is for our assessments to become increasingly more holistic, but at that point in time, it was just to ensure that assessments, more formal assessments, were actually taking place. The results of the assessments were then used to design challenge weeks, which children's learning and thinking could be extended further during, or if there were children who hadn't performed as well in the application week as you were expecting, it'd be an opportunity to find out exactly what was going on there and do some support as well. So we also updated our reporting calendar and processes and tied these into our teaching, learning and assessment cycles, using the results of the application week to update parents and carers on their child's progress. The reports focused very much on literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing, strengths and areas for development. And we issued 3 reports in the year between inspections, much reduced in terms of the amount that was in them, but really focused on what that child could now achieve and what they then needed to do. Having evaluated it since, we've now moved to 2 reports per year with face-to-face reporting opportunities in between. In amongst lots of priorities in schools, as you'll all be well familiar with, unfortunately it's sometimes the foundations of curriculum for excellence that actually get a bit lost. So the overall aim of this structure was to really strengthen staff understanding of the relationships between learning, teaching, assessment and reporting and the cyclical nature of this, and to improve progression throughout the school. It also increased the pace of learning as teachers weren't simply teaching to terms, so topics weren't being extended beyond perhaps where they should have been. It really made things a lot more concise. As well as this, there was extensive investigation and use of Education Scotland's benchmarks and Aberdeenshire Council's curricular frameworks. These are the main tools that we use to plan, assess and track progress, and we created new planning documents to support this. And whilst creating new planning documents and procedures, it was the perfect opportunity to ensure developing the young workforce was included throughout our long-term and our medium-term planning. So the steps that we took towards improving DYW was ensuring skills for learning, life and work were discussed explicitly in lessons and greatly increasing the number and range of visitors we had into school to discuss their job or their career and the skills that they needed to be able to do their jobs. The benchmarks from Education Scotland were a really welcome support tool for us and have been key in moderating and judging progress and achievement of a level. As part of improving the consistency of experiences children were receiving across the school, staff collegiately agreed what the key features of learning experiences in Bodham School needed to be. These key features, as agreed by the teaching staff, were then shared with the Pupil Council, who made suggestions, and we created our final list, which is shown here. The pupils also created visual displays in order to highlight it to our whole school community. In schools, we often talk about high-quality teaching and learning, and this may seem really obvious, but if you're in a similar situation to the one that we were, it's really important your staff actually have a shared understanding of what high-quality learning and teaching is. Your finalised list can then be used in lots of different ways. It can be used during plenaries, management observations, peer observations, self-evaluation and reflection. You can ask the children at the end of a lesson to say which of these features they actually recognise as being part of the lesson as part of their feedback to you. There's lots of different ways that this can be used, so if that's an exercise you haven't done, I would highly recommend it. We adopted two approaches that I think really supported us to provide more challenging and relevant activities which were better matched to children's needs and abilities. That was a big part of the feedback. So the first of these was capitalising on carousel activities, so essentially having several stations that children could spend a set period of time at before moving on to the next one. And again, that might sound really obvious, but if you consider a class doing an activity in a maths lesson where they're just looking at a textbook page and compare it to a carousel where they're going to engage in that concept in 4 or 5 different ways and get the opportunity to apply their skills in 4 or 5 different ways, it's easy to see how learning time is then maximised, because that is a significant number of different opportunities that they're having within that one lesson. So carousels are now actually the main method that we use for teaching literacy and numeracy, and that is throughout the school, not just early years, which is where people would be more likely to expect it. The other was introducing a whole school approach to differentiation, which we have called Chile Challenges. Some of you might have heard of them, might be using something similar. So it's an added layer of differentiation where materials or tasks are separated into mild, medium or hot, or 1, 2 or 3 chilies. Combining these two strategies, you might have 4 different activities going on in the one lesson, but at each activity there is then an opportunity for children to challenge themselves further or to choose an activity that is at the right level for them. At points, children will select the wrong chili when they're doing their learning, so sometimes the teachers intervene in those situations and other times they let them try it and work out for themselves that they've got work that's not quite at the right level, but I would always say if they're being lazy then teachers definitely need to intervene. And these two strategies we found very quickly provided more challenge and more relevance to learners as well as promoted engagement throughout the school. We found that children were far more engaged in learning activities because that pace of learning had been really increased. I haven't gone into lots of detail about that. I'm very aware of the fact we've got not just primary colleagues here, so if anybody wants to ask me more about those afterwards, then you're more than welcome to. And again, as you'll have seen from the feedback, our wellbeing programmes were highlighted as needing considerable work. And I recognise that ensuring appropriate skills progression throughout the school would need a significant amount of work and collegiate time, and with everything else that needed to be done, this just wasn't going to be possible in the time frame that we had. So I decided that a part-time member of staff was actually going to teach health and well-being as a discrete subject in the same way that you might have somebody doing PE or science or languages, and that they would have a lead role in being responsible for ensuring that progression from primary 1 to primary 7, and also working alongside class teachers to making sure there was consistency between what was being taught discretely and what was being discussed in the classroom. And we were particularly focused on ensuring that the children knew the wellbeing indicators, how these were supported at home, how they were supported at school, and sharing that information with the school community. The inspectors are very interested in how well this information is known by your pupils and your school community. So I would definitely prioritise this, have assemblies that are themed on it, make sure your class teachers, when they're having their day-to-day discussions, are talking about the wellbeing indicators, and just making sure that they're part of the everyday language in your school. Again, there's a long list of improvements, but accurate tracking and monitoring of children's progress was also highlighted as a development need, and this is an area that we made extensive improvements within. So firstly, I created an individual tracking document that's used to track progress 3 times per year. So just to explain each column, I'm afraid I can't move from this microphone, but if you look at the primary 2, and then it's got a B and SEP underneath, that is the baseline assessment that we gave them in September. So the numbers that we use are 1 for making progress significantly below national expectation, a 2 is making progress 6 months behind national expectation, 3 is in line with, 4 is ahead of, and 5 is well ahead of. So in a baseline in September, and also a prediction for where we expect them to be by the end of the year. And then November, February and May, the PR is for progress. So teachers then input the progress pupils are making at each of those tracking periods. That's for every child. This information is then transferred into a further document that allows me to easily access the attainment information of every child in the school. I can filter in lots of different ways, such as looking at those children who are well below or below national expectation and comparing that with our ASL provision to ensure that our support is correctly allocated. I can also filter by groups of children, so EAL, SIMD2, to look at the overall attainment picture for these learners and track the impact of interventions that we've put in place for them. I also have tracking meetings with teachers at each of the tracking periods, and I use the above questions, which are taken partly from the challenge questions and from the language and how good is our school for. And that's really for structuring the professional dialogue to ensure the focus is always on supporting our learners effectively and improving progress and attainment. And class teachers have said that they've found this information and these meetings to be incredibly helpful for reflecting on their own practice and the allocation of their PSA time in their classes. And improvements to our tracking and monitoring also extended to achievement as well. So we track the wider achievement opportunities our children engage with to ensure the provision we offer in terms of lunchtime and after school clubs supports them to build a balanced portfolio of achievement. So example from the graph that you can see here, you'll see that none of our children were engaging in any accredited wider achievement opportunities. So this year we're looking to implement Children's University, which will give the learners lots of opportunities to get accreditation. And since collation of this data, one of our members of staff ran a John Muir after school club as well. So again, further opportunities for accreditation. We also analyse this data in terms of our children in deprivation, our EAL learners and our free school meals children to identify barriers there may be for them accessing wider achievement opportunities and remove these where possible. So for example, we noticed that our EAL learners engaging in sports clubs was really low, and then we realised that a lot of the sports clubs were run by our active schools and they used to give out paper leaflets. Of course, paper leaflets that are given out to parents of EAL families can't be translated. Really simple, my admin got in touch with active schools, we got a Word version, we put that up on group call which our parents could then translate into a language. We now have a higher uptake of our EAL learners going along to sports clubs. So the emerging theme you will see throughout this presentation, it's really just about identifying your gaps and changing or improving your practice, and sometimes it is really simple things like recognising that a leaflet can't be translated for all of your families. Another gap that was identified was the involvement of pupils in school improvement, and I had to consider the best way that that could be achieved in our context with everything else we were trying to improve. So I decided that pupil voice groups would be the best vehicle to do this, but as well as pupil council, eco group and the usual pupil voice groups, we created a group for literacy, a group for numeracy and a group for health and wellbeing. The groups are involved in designing and making real improvements to the school. So for example, the numeracy group created a lunchtime club called Mathstopia that a quarter of our school then ended up attending. They put up homework sheets, the kids got house points for it, and there was a huge uptake and surge in pupils' involvement in numeracy, and that was all from the ideas that this pupil voice group had come up with. The health and wellbeing group, they started selling healthy tuck in our school, so they were responsible for getting the produce, for making it, for selling it, dealing with all the money, so again lots of enterprising skills, and they also organised a health week where we had lots of different health providers coming into school as well. Our literacy group, they created a questionnaire to gather information about pupil opinions on how they were taught and how they learn writing skills. They then analysed the data, summarised what learners find helpful, and then they were able to share this information with the staff team. So again, don't underestimate the things that children will come up with that are actually working exactly alongside what you want to do, and they have got real ownership over it. That made a really big difference in our school. And the pupil voice groups are still an integral part of how our pupils are involved in school improvement. I think one of the most important things that you can do in moving a school forward is ensuring you provide lots of support to your staff team and your colleagues, no matter what role you have got within a school. Teachers often get annoyed with head teachers. They think, what now, not more information. However, what you're often not seeing if you're not in management is the extreme pressure that head teachers can be under from lots of angles, and often pressures that they are trying to shield you from. And head teachers, often due to this extreme pressure and necessity to move things forward, can forget what it's like to be in the classroom and the many different aspects of children's lives that teachers face every single day. So one of the ways that I've found to really try and bridge that gap is just ensuring there's a high level of communication in the school. So you'll all have your own ways of doing that. One of the things that my staff absolutely love, and when I've had new members of staff, they said, oh, this is brilliant, I've never had this before. And again, something really simple is just sending out a weekly overview before school starts on a Monday of everything that is going on in school that week. And that doesn't just go to the teaching staff, it goes to my PSAs, it goes to my nursery staff, it goes to my janitor, to my support staff, so everybody knows what's going on. And then teachers don't get annoyed when they've planned a PE lesson and you say, I'm really sorry, the woodwind demonstration's needing the hall this morning. So it's just about that, making sure everything's organised and everybody's aware of what's going on. I also have a section in my staff meetings for sharing authority and national updates, and when we're looking at improvements, I give the background for them, I give the purpose of them, so nothing feels like we're doing it just for the sake of it. It might be through sharing documentation, like building the curriculum 3 or developing the young workforce. It might be a video from the Scottish Learning Festival, and we look at why we're doing it and what it's going to improve for our children, and always keeping that. What impact is this going to have on our children? Because if it's not going to have an impact on our children, we really shouldn't be doing it. It shouldn't be taking up any of our time. And people are always more willing to work towards a goal if they see and understand the purpose of it, not just we're doing this because I've said we're doing it. I think also acknowledgement that this is a difficult service we work in, and I think we're in a situation where the provision of other services seems to be becoming increasingly stretched, increasingly sparse. My experience is that some of the benchmarks for children getting into these services are becoming higher, the rate at which they're discharged from the service is becoming faster, and we are one of the only services that actually cannot disengage from a child or a family. And that is enormous for everybody in a school team, because regardless what is going on for that pupil or that family, we are there, we are the constant, we are on the front line, and we can't close our service to them. So I think just acknowledgement that everybody in a school is facing that and is working really hard to try and do the best for the pupils and the families. So I would say do what you can to keep your workplace positive, whatever role you're in. Student teacher, deputy head, head teacher, if you're somebody who works in CLD that's in partnership with a school, whatever you can to try and keep that a positive place. If you're a manager, sometimes I think you have to shelf the pressures that are on you, paint on a smile and be the positive driving force that the staff team need. You have to still ask them how things are going, if there's anything you can do to help while you feel like you're actually drowning in your own stuff. But at other times, I think it's okay to let your staff know that you're finding things difficult, because I found that actually sometimes my staff team come up with solutions that I wouldn't have thought of because I'm in the middle of it. So I think it's about getting that balance as well. And I think it's about creating a positive culture and knowing your staff team really, really well. I think you need to get them on board and you need to make sure they see the purpose of the journey that you're on. Preparing for re-inspection. That was stressful. So in the day-to-day running of a school, although that you have got all of the evidence, you've been using it, if you're like me, you don't always have it printed out in an order that you'd necessarily want to share with inspectors. I work very much on my laptop, very electronically, so I did have to spend a little bit of time getting that evidence prepared exactly the way that I wanted it. So I had an evidence folder for each of the QIs that we had been evaluated week in, and I had post-it notes that explained certain parts of it. I had the You Said We Did document that I showed you earlier at the start of each folder, and then I organised my evidence to follow that narrative. And just remember that evidence doesn't have to be graphs, it doesn't have to be analysed data, it doesn't have to be fancy documents. I had photographs of visitors that we'd had into school to show how we were improving DYW. I had examples of improvement updates I'd sent out to parents on Class Dojo. Anything that supports and proves your evaluation, that is evidence. I had my more extensive improvement plan documents, obviously, and my action plan, but you want the scoping meeting, you have another scoping meeting again, and you want that to be really streamlined, the big messages. So I had 7 sides of A4, and for each QI I wrote the big actions and developments, where we are now and what you'll see, and where we're going next, just showing that I know you're coming back to see where we are now. We're not just thinking about this, we are thinking about what's happening in the future as well and where we need to go. I also had a folder with all of the previous inspection documentation to hand, so our summary of inspection findings, our published letter, and I think it does make a difference having everything you need nearby because it keeps you calm, makes you feel organised, keeps you calm and not scrabbling about for things. Again, Aileen, my managing inspector, let me know each day what was coming up the next day and gave me an indication of things to have ready. So tomorrow I'm going to be looking at IEPs, so that was really helpful. And I'd say make things as easy as possible for the inspectors. So when Aileen said she was going to be looking at IEPs, I had the IEP for the child, I had their tracking document showing the progress they'd made, and I had examples of their work showing where they were at the start of the year and where they were now. I'd say the more you can give the inspectors, the less they need to go looking. So following all of those key improvement actions, we were absolutely delighted when Education Scotland inspectors returned in May of last year and were able to report on a significant change to the standard of education at Bodham School. So they reported that the consistency of children's experiences was much improved. Children were more confident when talking about their learning and their strategies. Teachers referred to the relevance of learning. The pace of learning was well considered, and the use of tasks at the right levels for individuals ensures that the needs of all children are being met consistently. That was a really big one for us. Monitoring and tracking of children's progress, including those children with additional needs, is now much more robust. Learning is monitored well, appropriate targets are being set for every child. Relationships across the school community very positive, strong climate of respect, children considerate of others, behaviours very good. The behaviour management supports children to demonstrate our positive vision and values, children being treated as individuals, having someone they can talk to about situations affecting their lives, and the confidence and assuredness about their progress in health and well-being. Staff are now providing much more rigour and better evidence to track children's progress over time. Attainment is improving, improvements to reading, improvements to writing, and improvements to numeracy. So thankfully, a much improved picture, and although we might not be excellent yet, that's definitely the direction that we're moving in, and it is thanks to the intervention and support of Education Scotland. Do I think we eventually would have got there by ourselves? Perhaps, and maybe to some extent, but at the pace that we did and to the extent that we did without inspection, I definitely don't think so. So despite my initial reservations and worries about being inspected, and sometimes, as I'm sure you'll have experienced, less than helpful reassurances from colleagues, both inspections were incredibly supportive and they did have a really positive impact on my school. So that includes improved attainment, improved consistency of educational experiences, children's needs being met more consistently, improved standards of learning and teaching, increased pace of change, increased staff confidence, improved partnership working, and improved understanding and appreciation of inspection. So I've got some final hints and tips for anybody that wants them. So my first one would be have your child protection sorted. It's not for the sake of the inspection, it is for the sake of your children, but the safeguarding meeting I mentioned earlier is all about what you are doing in school to protect children. You have to submit a document ahead of the inspection which details what you're doing, and during the safeguarding meeting you'll be questioned on aspects of it. So I would say, if you don't already, have a child protection folder in each class with national guidance, local guidance, your school-based procedures, including absolutely your school's own procedure for it, and any PowerPoints or training materials that you've used. Have a child protection training register and get each member of staff and volunteer to sign this once they've done the training, so that you have got a really clear record that everybody that is working or volunteering in your school has undertaken that training. Be honest with what's going on in your school. Other than child protection, I can't imagine anything more worrying for an inspection team than a management team who are unaware of the standards in their school, as that means your self-evaluation is not very brilliant, and then how are you going to self-improve? So I'd say be honest and have evidence to support your judgments. Also be honest if there are things you don't have in place, acknowledge it as a development need, and share ideas of what you plan to do to improve in that area. Strive for excellence, no matter where you are in your journey. One of my favourite quotes is, shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. As I said earlier, get your staff team on board and for the plan, and support them to see the why and how of what you're doing. Share any concerns you have with the inspectors. As explained earlier, they're really understanding. They've all worked in schools before and they understand that particular situations can arise, so make sure you do concern those. Use how good is our school for, a management member, a teacher, whatever you're doing in a school, make sure you are using that. This is what Education Scotland are using to evaluate you, so have everything in line with that as you possibly can. Be organised, as I've said, have as much to hand as you possibly can. This will help to keep you calm, stop you from trying to grab around at things. And if you do need something that you don't have to hand, just ask the inspectors if you can give it to them later in the day. They are human beings, they have been in your position, they absolutely will understand if you need to get something to them later on. And keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is our children. One thing we spoke about extensively in the time between our inspections is that we wanted to prove to the inspectors that we could make the changes and reach the standards, but we weren't doing it for the inspectors. We were doing it for our children and improving for them because they deserve the best education and it's our job to provide it to them. So make sure you keep your learners absolutely at the heart of your improvements. Aileen tried to tell me during the first visit that one day I would look back on the inspection and realise it was the start of a very important journey for me. And I couldn't see it at the time through the disappointment. However, on reflection, that is exactly what it was. I wouldn't be here speaking with you today, and last year I wouldn't have had the opportunity to present to other colleagues, and I wouldn't have had the honour of presenting at the International Inspectors Conference about my inspection experience. Don't believe everything you hear about inspections. People are always willing to share negative experiences. This wasn't my experience, and it's not the experience that lots of colleagues have had. I don't think without the robust inspection model and the inspector's commitment to achieving excellence for the children in Scotland, Bodham School wouldn't be where it is today, in a much stronger and a much more positive position than we were. So I've gone from having no experience of inspection to being an advocate for the Scottish inspection model. And I have finally been able to see that our initial stumble was in fact very much part of our dance and a key moment in our ongoing improvement story. So just to thank you all very much, unfortunately, I don't know what's happened to my last slide. I will give anybody who wants it my email address. I'll pop it back up. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to come and see me after the seminar, because we are just running slightly over time. I've also had colleagues from the last seminar who have then been going through inspection or have been between inspections who have contacted me just for some advice or some hints and tips, and I'm more than happy to help out with whatever I can. But thank you very much, everyone.